least it's not pouring down rain. Be grateful for small things. I'm Dr. Tim Smith, Associate Provost of the College. It's my great pleasure to welcome you this morning to our Provost Forum featuring Dr. Q. Before we do anything else, of course, first the usual public service announcements. Please silence or turn off your phones. And for those who might be sitting kind of toward the back right here, we are videoing these presentations, and we would ask if you would please refrain from talking because your comments will then be saved for posterity along with Dr. Q's enlightening words. So with that, now to today's speaker, Dr. Guangjun Qu joined the BSc faculty in 2012 and currently serves as Associate Professor of Economics at the college. He received a BA and MA from Chongqing Technology and Business University and a PhD from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. His research specialties include open economy macroeconomics, international trade and finance, Asian economies, and political economy. His talk today is entitled Anticorruption Campaigns, Fight for What? Please help me welcome to the stage Dr. Q.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for everyone to coming. I really hate this mic thing. It gets me just kind of grounded here. I really wish I could walk around. Let me talk a little bit about the background. Why I became interested in corruption or anti-corruption. I want to start with the personal experience. Not voluntarily, but voluntarily involved in kind of the bribery experience. So that happened when I was 12 years old. In China, the educational resource is very scarce. So if you want to get in a good school, you have to do really well on all kinds of tests. So when I was 12 years old, I was about to go to a middle school. So I took a lot of tests. Some of these are reading tests, math tests, writing tests, because they know people are going to cheat on these tests. So all of these tests are kind of standardized. Okay, a lot of bubble sheets and a lot of standardized questions like SAT, ACT. You guys took here, but we just took it earlier in our lives. But there's one exception, which is a PE test. Can you imagine that there's a PE test for the entrance of the middle school, high school, or even the college? Okay? The PE test cannot be standardized. Okay? So they're gonna rate like how fast you run for 100 meters, for example, how high you can jump. All right. So when that test day approached, one morning my dad walked me to the school. And he carried a black bag with something inside. So I asked him, what's inside? And he told me, don't ask. And then when we get to the school, he walked to the PE teacher's office. I don't know what happened after that. But several days later, I found that my PE test score was perfect. It was a big surprise for me. I usually do like 6 or 7 out of 10, but that time is perfect. So I went home telling him that, I did perfect on the PE test. How come? He said, it worked. I said, what worked? He said, don't ask. So years later, he told me that he put a bottle of wine in that black bag. Right? And he even asked me, did your PE teacher actually get drunk when he read your scores, like, running, jumping, whatever? So that's, again, it's the first experience I had in my life about the corruption. And I bet that the corruption is everywhere. It's not just in China or in developing countries. It's everywhere. So here I just want to show you very quickly about what we heard in the past few years. I bet, we got political scientists sitting in front, they can come up with a lot of examples about this, right? What's on the left-hand side? I think this is okay, right? I can roll along. Do you guys sitting back there can hear me all right? Or you still want me doing this? What's on the left-hand side is crispy, right? Why the heck is setting on the bridge? Bridgegate, right? Or it's called George Washington Bridge Scandal. Okay? So this bridge is a very important way for people living in New Jersey but working in New York City. So they commute on a daily basis through this bridge. And I think probably 4 or 5 years ago, there was one morning, all of a sudden people realized that the 2 lanes on the bridge were closed without any ahead of time notice. Okay? So you could imagine that thousands of cars get stuck over there, including school buses. When they eventually went to the school, it was about the time to send the kids back home. Okay? And some emergency service vehicles, I believe that there's one patient actually died because of the ambulance did not make it to the hospital in a timely manner. Later, the investigators find that they did this. Actually, one staff member in Christie's office told the local traffic authority to do that on purpose. Okay? They did that because the local mayor did not endorse Christie's 2012 gubernatorial election. So that's the price the mayor had to pay. Okay? On your right-hand side, I think probably more of us are familiar with this, right? It happened, again, several years ago with our former governor. Okay? And there was one day he had an argument with his wife, then wife, I should say, in Tuscaloosa. And after that, he drove himself to the golf course. Okay? And when he get there, he realized that he left his wallet behind in the home in Tuscaloosa. So he actually sent the state helicopter back to Tuscaloosa and get the wallet for him. Now, if you would like to Google that after, you may find more juicy details about this. Okay? But I'm not going to share that with you. Anyway, what I'm saying is, we've heard over and over again that corruption is a fundamental issue anywhere. It could argue that, it becomes more serious issue, okay, or more rapid in developing world than here in the United States or any other developed country. But again, it's everywhere. Okay? So that's why I'm really interested in corruption, okay? Especially in the past few years. And I did several research about the corruption measurement and how could we measure it. Especially, it's fundamentally a criminal activity, right? Everything took place behind the door or under the table. How could we measure it? And we also look at the anti-corruption campaign run by the Chinese government in recent years. Okay? So what I'm presenting here is a joint work with my co-authors. Okay? The issue we're looking at here is definitely these anti-corruption campaigns. From the conventional Western perspective, we believe that if we want to get corruption controlled, then we need fundamental improvement of our system. It could be political system, economic system, even the social norm, cultures, right? But that will take a lot of time. We're talking about decades-long efforts, right? For developing countries, they probably won't be that patient, or they won't be that kind of resource available for them to do. So what happened in China in recent years becomes one option. So the Communist Party of China ran a series of anti-corruption campaigns. All of these efforts are made in a campaign style. In other words, very intense within a few years. Okay? And they run their propaganda machine. Okay? and they put more resources into the law enforcement just for the anti-corruption efforts. Right? So many developing countries may find this is very appealing if they want to do something with the corruption. Right? Now here I want to quickly show you the scale of these campaigns in recent years in China. Okay? These numbers actually outdated, okay? But I still put it over there because it's in my sample period. Okay? Now, the more up-to-date information is last year, the Communist Party in China released the official data. They said that in the past 5 or 6 years, there were 2.5 million corruption cases investigated. There were 1.5 million government officials actually charged because of the corruption. So you can imagine 1.5 million. That's even more than the total population of Greater Birmingham, right? Not just about the scale, but also about the level. Okay, so in the old days, before President Xi took the office, the Communist Party continued to do anti-corruption, but oftentimes it's just a lower level government officials who will get caught. This time, we find multiple members of the Politburo, or you could take them as national leaders, actually get caught because of the corruption. Okay? So both the size and the level could tell us that this time they took it very seriously. Okay? And that's why on the Chinese media, especially the official media of the party, okay, controlled, owned, established by the party, they said that this is a huge success. So they already get the corruption controlled, okay, after these few years' efforts. But when you look at the other side of the world, especially the mainstream media in the West, they remain skeptical about this, okay? Especially the motivations. Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that in such a serious way? Okay? And oftentimes they would say that it's because the new leadership under President Xi want to get their political rivalries out of office. Okay? Because in China there's no election. So when the new leadership was stepped into the office, they want to get rid of the people who were appointed by the previous administration or leadership. Okay? So what they would always do is go after them and charge them because of the corruption. Okay? That way, it can be widely accepted by general public. So the goal of this sabbatical study is to assess the anti-corruption campaign, how effective they are, and in terms of reduce corruption and change government behaviors in a fundamental way. But the first and foremost challenge here is to get things measured. Right? So it's like if someone tells you that he or she is working out these days to lose weight, how effective that effort is, you have to get the weight grade in the first place, right? You also need to measure the efforts, like how many hours he or she spent working out every day, how many calories burned, right? So the same thing here. If we want to measure how effective these campaigns are, two things we have to measure. The first one is the corruption, right? That's the outcome. The second one is the anti-corruption efforts made by the government. Okay? Now let's check out what has been put forward in the literature. Okay? About the corruption, the praxis or the measures of corruption. Many international organizations, including the World Bank and Transparency International, they simply survey a lot of experts out there or the general public about how corrupt you believe the United States is this year or last year, how corrupt China is. Okay? So it's all subjective judgment. Some people don't like that. They said they want to rely more upon the objective numbers, so they would like to go with the number of corruption cases registered by prosecutors or number of cases convicted. Okay? So these are corruption measures. What about anti-corruption? Look at these. What do you find? It's exactly the same measures. Okay? So what happened on the ground is when they survey people, like how corrupt do you believe the U.S. is, when people give you that magic number, they actually factor in a lot of things, like how corrupt we are. Also, how much effort we put in the law enforcement to go after the corrupt officials, right? So it's both. It's a mixture of both. So that, we find a lot of concerns already raised in the literature. Right? They said, what exactly you guys are measuring? Are you measuring corruption or anti-corruption efforts? And so in this study, what we're doing is we're trying to use an innovative measure of anti-corruption, which my author and I came up with 2 years ago. But we're not going to look at the effect of the anti-corruption efforts upon corruption itself. Again, because these two are kind of intertwined, right? It's very hard to separate one from the other. Instead, we're going to look at the effect of the anti-corruption efforts made by the party upon the government revenue and expenditure. Okay? If it does reduce corruption, we believe it could change government revenue and expenditure, especially the allocation of the resources, which I will elaborate later. All right, so this is the fundamental question or the topic we are approaching here, right, about the public revenue and the expenditure. The legal review. Now, in the literature, there's a large group of studies talking about how corruption can distort the fiscal structures or the fiscal allocation of the resources. Now, here are some examples. The first one is, we all know that, in terms of the government, they have two general categories of revenues. The first one is taxes. The second one is non-taxes, including fees, charge. So if you're running a restaurant, you probably need to get a permit, right? You get a license, all kinds of fees the government will charge. Or sometimes you guys go to the DMV, right? You have to pay over there to get your driver's license. Generally speaking, we find that the government, especially the corrupt government, prefer non-tax revenue or charge, simply because it's less transparent. Right? The taxes, the tax rate, the brackets of your income, how much you're supposed to be taxed, everything is set in stone, right? It's already written in our law, the tax code. But for non-taxes, it's not. So there's more room for government officials to play with. Right? So that could be one distortion created from the resource perspective, right? Like they prefer the non-tax resources. Another interesting thing we find is about spending. They prefer spending on the big specialized projects, like the infrastructure, like the defense. So if you think about like $1 billion highway project, if the government official only took 0.1% as a bribery, we're talking about $1 million, right? That's a lot of money. But again, it's a lot of money, but it accounts for a little bit in the future. So as a general contractor, they can easily manipulate their material cost, labor cost, to cover it up, right? So they always prefer the big projects. They always prefer the specialized. Like the intersection they're building out there, right? You cannot find a comparable project on the market, right? However, you can compare, for example, the free lunch provided by school, right? They always have some kind of the criteria, like you got to have one egg over there, right? One piece of chicken. So they can find different restaurants or different suppliers. It can be easily compared. But for the infrastructure project, it's not. Everything is different. Okay, so they can easily argue that, we spend more because it leads more. All right? So eventually we find that, again, from the fiscal perspective, there's overinvestment of this infrastructure, okay, or the defense project. We may not need that much. but the government officials like it. There will be an underinvestment of our daily use of fiscal resources, including education, welfare, healthcare, and social security, stuff like that. Okay? So that's something we could test with the anti-corruption campaign run by the Chinese government. And again, one thing I still want to emphasize is this is a campaign style, so it's not something we are familiar, here in the United States. Okay, the long-term improvement of the institutions. All right, hypotheses. Okay? We have 3 hypotheses, but all of them are built upon this assumption that the campaign successfully reduced corruption. Okay? Now, the first one, based upon what we already said, we would expect that the share of tax revenues in total government revenue or budgetary revenue should fall. I think there's a typo here. I'm sorry about that. So this should be fall and this should be rise. Okay? Now, the rationale behind this hypothesis is, for example, if you're running your restaurant, you get some health violations, you are fined. Okay? Let's say you have to pay $1 million to the local government. But you don't want to do that, so you bribe the government official with $10,000. Because this is not the taxes, so they can manipulate the fine, right? They said they could reduce your fine by 50%, so you only need to pay $500,000, or they would let you pay probably $250,000, right? So what we're saying is corruption could hurt the non-tax revenues, right? Because they take a lot of briberies, they artificially reduce the non-tax revenues, right? So if the campaign is successful, of course, these non-tax revenues should rise. The second one is the land sales. Again, this is something very unique in China because literally Chinese government is still own every piece of land in China. Right? So it's only 7 on the land market. Over time, because of the fast economic growth, Chinese government sold a lot of land for real estate developers to the commercial developers. They made a lot of money through this. There are many numbers out there showing that the Chinese government actually raised more than 50% of its total revenue through land sales, not taxes or non-tax revenues. Okay? So that's why we want to check the second thing. If the anti-corruption campaign, if it actually reduces the corruption, how does it deal with the land sales? Okay? If the government officials lose the corruption or bribery opportunities, they may not have any incentive to promote land sales. Okay? So that's a second hypothesis. The third one, we're looking at the spending, different spending components, including education, healthcare, and other things. I will show you later. If we're assuming that the government officials are not going to spend that much on infrastructure, on the big projects, then there could be more fiscal resources available for the daily, like the livelihood, right? These daily spending. So we're going to look at these as well. As I said, the first thing to do here is to get anti-corruption efforts measured. Right? That's what we have to do. Now, we're using an innovative way to do this, and it's also kind of the big data mining thing. So we look at all the official newspapers in China. Now, official newspapers means they are part of the Communist Party's propaganda machine. Right? They completely owned, controlled by the party. And every article published on these newspapers is screened. Okay? Or proofread by the party. So what I'm showing you is just 2, kind of the front page of the People's Daily. So that's at the national level, the official newspaper. The one on your left-hand side was decades ago during the Mao years. Okay? If you know Chinese, on the very top, you can still see that they have these kind of the political kind of the words, okay, the propaganda things up there, saying that Chairman Mao will live forever, okay, which is stupid for sure. But the stupid thing is still there after these decades. So the one on your right-hand side, that's more recent. That's when President Xi took the office. Again, on the Washington Post or New York Times, you will never see stuff like this, right? So it's kind of, like the booklet, like all kinds of the information about the new leadership, okay? Like who they are, their pictures, their kind of the background, okay? The point I want to get across here is, in these days, we see a lot of people doing data mining, especially doing that online, okay? Like the Twitter, like the Facebook. But a common critic they receive is there's no clear viewpoint about like what kind of voices we are looking at, okay, or we hear. Because the Twitter, it could be an official Twitter account, our BSC official Twitter, right? Or it could be a personal Twitter, or it could be the government Twitter. So, when you do the data mining, when you pull every piece of information together, you have no idea like what this voice represents. But here, with the official newspapers in China, we don't have any concern about that. It's crystal clear this is the party, this is the government. Okay? So what we do here specifically is we count the number of corruption-related articles published on these newspapers. Okay? And there is a newspaper database. It's called China National Knowledge Infrastructure. They include about 17 million articles from more than 600 Chinese newspapers, okay? Starting from the year 2000. So what specifically we do is we use the key phrase searching strategy. We use the corruption, bribery, malfeasance, and investment, these keywords. And sometimes people would say, do you really think these articles are telling us the anti-corruption efforts, or they just want to get these corruption scandals exposed? I often have to get that kind of question from American audience because they're not familiar with the official newspaper. When I present the same thing to the Chinese audience, I never get that kind of question. Okay? There's no doubt that this is, that the party has no incentive to simply expose negative things like corruption scandals to the public, because that's going to hurt the ruling of the party, right? Or the justification of the party's ruling. If the party publishes something about corruption on the official newspaper, it always means they're fighting corruption. So they present the best of the party or themselves, right? So we're addressing that concern. So anyway, the other effort we made is we try to include more kind of the law enforcement terms here. So the first one is the Committee of the Discipline Inspection. So that's the government agent specializing in corruption fighting, okay? Or the party's self-governors, party's contact. Again, these are the words that commonly appears with these corruption articles, okay? The last thing we did with this measure is to normalize it, because the official newspapers, the size could vary across time, right? And sometimes there might be, have more pages than other times. So we divided the number of articles we searched to the all articles. We also divided by the number of the government-related articles. So we use different ways to normalize it. Okay? But the results are the same. All right, so here is a quick look at these anti-corruption efforts. Okay? And you can find there's a huge variation geographically or over time. Okay? Now, what's on your left-hand side is the sample period between 2008 and 2012. So that was under the previous administration, President Hu Jintao. And the one on your right hand side is under President Xi. Okay? The darker a province, the more corruption-related articles we find in their provincial level official newspapers. Okay? Again, we take that as a proxy for the anti-corruption efforts they made. Okay? So generally speaking, you would find that during the Xi's administration, the party did fight corruption much harder than the previous one. Okay? Also, you find kind of the geographical pattern here. So, for example, there are many interesting observations you can make, but I will just point out probably one or two. Interesting thing is when you go far inland, so this is a coastal area, so this is Beijing, this is Shanghai, okay? So this is a coastal area. These provinces are economically stronger, okay? They are the richest ones in China. And when you go far inland, you will find the relatively poorer, okay, provinces. You will find that here in the far inland area, no matter which administration you're looking at, you always find fewer corruption-related articles, right? One possible explanation is in these far inland provinces, there are more ethnically minority groups living there. So again, from the party's perspective, they don't want to rock the boat, right? They know that if they expose too much negative things in these provinces, these ethnic minority groups may come up and challenge the party's rule. So everything is kind of politically figured out. Okay? Do you have any questions? I might go a little faster. Now here is the empirical results. Okay? Before we talk about these specific numbers, let me show you or talk about the colorimetric setup. I didn't put it on the screen because it's actually pretty simple. So on the left-hand side, all of these dependent variables are the different components. Okay? So for example, you see the taxes, you see the land sales revenues. But remember, we're looking at over time comparison, right? So the inflation would be one thing we have to adjust. But there's one way where we don't have to adjust for inflation. We actually use the tax revenue divided by the government total revenue. In other words, all of these are the shares. Okay? So it becomes unitless. You don't have to worry about the inflation at all. Okay? Every comparison is made in the relative sense. Okay? So the first two columns are about the government revenue. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 columns are about the expenditures, different components, okay, in the expenditure. So these are the dependent variables. And the independent variable is the anti-corruption measure I just showed you, okay, on the basis of the newspaper search results. And we also include a large group of the control variables, like the income per person, like the population, that measures the size of the economy, and the urban-rural inequality, urbanization, that's the population, the urban population in total population, okay, the share of that. So there's a large group of the control variables. But I don't put the control group results here because it's going to be messy. Okay? There are a lot of things. So what I showed you is just the key variable, the key X variable results, right? Anti-corruption. This table, I'm going to show you, I think probably more than 4 tables, I believe. Okay? And they look exactly the same. So I will, throughout this process, I will constantly remind you that, we're talking about different tables. Okay? But the structure is the same. So here, the first table, we're looking at across provinces. Okay? So it's the panel data, which covers 10 years. So from 2008 to 2017. The reason we want to do 10 years is because the first 5 years was under President Hu Jintao, the previous administration. The last 5 years was under President Xi. Okay, so we can do a perfect comparison here. And the provinces, there are 30 provinces in China. Okay? And the dependent variable here, I said it's a level. That means we just look at the level of the share. And later, I will also show you the change. In other words, year by year change. Why we want to do both? Because there could be an argument out there saying that, for the government, especially in the big economy, their first fiscal structure might be very stable, very persistent. So if you just look at the level, you may not be able to identify any teeny tiny change over time. So that's why we do both level and the change. Okay? I'm also showing you 3 different ways we run the regression. The first one is we do that for the whole sample period. The middle panel and the bottom one, we split the sample period. So again, this one is under President Xi. This one is under President Hu. Okay? We're doing that to show you if there's anything significant we find, would that be applicable for the 2 sub-periods? Okay? All right, so what do we find here? It looks like that the anti-corruption campaign did reduce the tax revenue, or the share of the tax revenue, okay, compared to the non-tax ones. But it has nothing to do with the land sales revenue. Okay? If we believe this is because of the anti-corruption campaign, the reasoning should be applicable for the sub-periods. In other words, we should see an even more significant results with the last 5 years, right? Because the party fought corruption much harder during this period of time. But interestingly, we didn't find any significant results here. And we didn't find any significant here either. In other words, if we put all of these 3 panels together, just look at the taxes, the results are not consistent, right? Or are not consistent with the hypothesis we just raised. Now, let's look at the expenditure. On the expenditure side, again, we find over the whole period, the influence of anti-corruption campaign upon education is positive. Okay? That means because of the anti-corruption, because government officials may have fewer bribery opportunities, so they are willing to spend more on education, which sounds pretty good, right? Again, for the sub-period, we didn't find very robust and consistent results. Okay? So it only appears for the whole sample period, and it's only significant at 10% level. Sorry, I should say that, the numbers in the brackets are the T statistics. I should have mentioned that before. So this one is the adjusted R square, and this is the number of observations. Right, now we have already stepped into table 2. Again, I'm not sure how many of you realize that. But you can look at this one, right? This work. Now we're talking about the change. Okay? You could argue, let me switch back to table 1. You could argue that we get a lot of insignificant results, statistically insignificant results, because the fiscal structure is very persistent. So now let's look at the annual change. It's pretty much the same thing. Or you could say it's even less significant if you look at the taxes, right? All right, so this is the table 2, and when we look at the annual change. The other way we can test the same hypothesis is we can go a lower level of the government. Now we're looking at the provincial government, right? The provincial government, you could argue that they rely more upon the tax revenues. But the local government, as I just mentioned, because they are technically the owner of every piece of land in China, so they actually raise a lot of money by selling land. And a lot of corruption scandals also taking place at the lower level. So let's check out the lower level. and see if we will find more significant results. This is table number 3. Again, you will find the difference here. So we're looking at 35 cities. Now, there are more than 300 cities in China. So they don't have, let me take that back. They have county in terms of the structure of or the level of the government. But in China, the county is actually smaller than the city. So it goes from national to provincial to municipal or city and eventually to county. Okay? So here we're looking at 35 major cities because the data about these cities are more available. Okay? We can definitely look at 300, but many of these cities we won't be able to get any data. All right, and again, the structure of the table is the same. And the results are more or less the same. Okay? So when we look at the taxes, you'll find that under President Xi, there's significant negative influence of the campaign upon the tax revenues, okay, or the share of the tax revenues. But we won't be able to find that when we look at the whole period. Okay? And when we look at the education, it's not the same thing we found before, right? This time, the numbers are still positive, but they are statistically insignificant. What's even more mysterious to us is when we look at the healthcare spending, we find that the Anti-Corruption Campaign actually reduced the healthcare spending. We don't know why. We don't have a very specific explanation about that. But it definitely goes the different direction from the hypothesis itself, right? It's not supporting hypothesis at all. Now, you can look at the science and technology spending. So we're talking about like the National Science Foundation, stuff like that. The government spend encouraging R&D. And you can look at public security, you can look at public services. Again, most of these are insignificant. Okay? Now, table number 4, we're looking at 35 cities, but the annual change. Okay? This time, we find that for taxes, the results are more consistent, are more supportive, okay, in terms of our hypothesis. So there's a negative influence. In other words, Anti-Corruption Campaign reduced the share of taxes. And we find the 10% significance with the last 5 years, but not the first 5 years, okay, which is exactly what we hypothesized. But again, on the other parts, like the components of the expenditures, we didn't find very strong support. Okay? The healthcare is still mysterious, right? It's still significant, but negatively affected. Another effort we made was we also, because these panel fixed effect estimations, what we can get from these results are just the correlations, and it's not really the causation or the causal relationship. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to say, even with these very few significant results, we want to see if there's causal relationship. Okay? So what we do is statistically called the difference in differences, or DD or DID methods. So what's interesting here is when President Xi initiated this campaign in 2013, because of the scarce of the fiscal resources or the law enforcement resources, the campaign was not initiated across the country in the same way. Okay? In other words, what they actually did is they handpicked several provinces and run the anti-corruption campaign for other provinces. So on the ground, the committee of the discipline inspection, which we just said, CDC, right? Oh, I'm sorry, CDI or CCDI. CCDI means the central committee, okay, at the national level. So they will send what's called inspection teams to different provinces to make sure you guys are enforcing the anti-corruption campaign. Okay? Because the local government officials may not have any incentive to do that, right? Why? I want to go after my colleagues. But again, at the national level, the government has a strong incentive to do that. Now, why this DID can help us figure out the causal relationship? Because, as we just said, at the national level, President Xi has a stronger incentive to do that. But the province or the city level, they don't. So for the provincial or city level government, where there are fiscal revenues or expenditures, this change is exogenous. It's not endogenous. In other words, when the local government officials make the decisions, they did not expect in 2013 or after there's going to be a massive anti-corruption run by the central government. Right? So this gives us a good chance to look at the causal relationship. Now, I did not really put the results here because, again, it's the same table. It's just, kind of more confusing when we create it. But generally speaking, none of these significant results we just found with a panel estimation survived. None of them. In other words, we didn't find any statistically significant results. Okay? So here is a conclusion. Did the anti-corruption campaign reshape the fiscal preference of the provincial government? Generally speaking, we would say no, right? So again, different things we already mentioned, especially with the panel fixed effect estimation. Okay? The municipal evidence tells us more or less the same thing. Okay? There might be some discrepancies, but generally speaking, it's the same thing. And nothing survived through the DD estimation. Okay? In other words, simply speaking, the conclusion here is the effectiveness of the anti-corruption campaign is a big question for us. Okay? We don't believe it's as effective as what the party said. Okay? Especially by focusing on the fiscal structure or the revenue or the expenditure components. We did not find any fundamental change. If there's no fundamental change in the fiscal structure of the government, we don't believe the incentives of the government ever changed. Okay? Now, what could be the possible explanations? There are several things we come up with. The first one is, as I just mentioned, because everything has been done in a very intensive way within a short period of time. So these campaign-style efforts might have a very limited effect in the long run. Right? Again, there's a trade-off. If you want to do something in the short run, this is probably better than the improvement of the political system, the legal system, the economic system. But the effect may be much smaller than what you expected. Okay? So this could be one possible explanation. The second one is what I just mentioned. If it's so persistent, even by looking at the annual change, you won't be able to find that unless we look at the data like over a period of 10 years, or 20 years, 30 years. It is possible. Okay? But we don't really believe, based upon the results we get, that's something really happened. The third one is very interesting. Whenever we present this to the Chinese audience, they always believe the third one is more likely to be the case on the ground. So they said what actually happened in China in the past few years was because of these massive anti-corruption campaigns, the government officials right now do not have the incentive to promote economic prosperity. Instead, they just sit in their office, lay back, do nothing. Because if you do nothing, you will least likely to be caught, right? Now, this is interesting, especially when we think about the outbreak of the coronavirus. Because if you look at the initial response from the Chinese government, it was extremely slow, and they tried to cover it up, which is exactly what we're talking about here. Right? They don't want anything coming out. That's it. They know they're not going to get benefit from this, but they don't want to pay any price. They don't want to even spend time doing that. So if that is the case, again, it can be used to explain all of these insignificant results we just talked about. All right? I think that's all I got for today. Thank you. Any questions?
Is there an index that measures the targets of the investigations? As you mentioned that maybe one of the mechanisms is that they're using to clear out previous party.
What kind of measures involved?
So I guess an index that says here's an investigation against the previous administration or previous party as a marker of the motivation for maybe that's a kind of corruption, right? It's actually cleared out.
Yes, there is kind of the individual level data, right? So it's got to be official by official, right? So I think that kind of data is pretty dirty because sometimes it may not be easy to say like, this is the person really, kind of under the previous leadership or very loyal to the previous leadership because they know the structure. So probably even like we'll talk about the transfer of the leadership taking place in 2013, right? But what actually happened in China is probably several years before that, people were expecting the leadership was going to come out, right? So they were already, kind of repositioning themselves. They don't want to be too close to the older leadership. They want to be at least in the middle or even closer to the upcoming leadership. So I do see people using that data, and there are some interesting applications. But again, I think the key is how we measure that political connection.
That's what it's important. If you switch orders.
Right.
You measure primarily just big corruption, rather than little daily corruption that's on people's lives, right? It doesn't really touch us like when a person goes through a big case and trying to get something done with the bureaucracy, greasing the machinery of the bureaucracy. We're talking about the big projects, big level corruption, right?
I think we do not try to measure corruption.
Right.
We are trying to measure impact on. If we are talking about corruption, yes, we need to look at that. For example, we got stopped by police, right, on the highway, and asked you to pay $100. We're not trying to do it.
So your anti-corruption that you're studying, is it anti-corruption at that level, just at the highest level?
I'm not sure if we should say it's the highest level because we go from national to municipal, right? But I could say it's about the government. It's not, as you said, it's not about people on the day how much they are affected by this corruption. And it's more about the public sector, so the government. We could have, like, in these countries we talk about corruption as well, right? But that's not the public.
These tools to domestic situations. I mean, a simple thing like with a speed trap in small town Alabama, you jump out of the data.
So, can we elaborate on that?
Well, you look at the sources of income
Yeah.
and pay the point of taxation versus fines and what have you. And it strikes me that if you get the budgets of various county municipalities, you might be able to see the same sort of features.
Yes, I think in terms of the sources, I believe so. They always find some room to play with. Like, no matter we're talking about taxes or non-tax revenues. But I guess, generally speaking, for developing countries, they would find that, again, because for taxes, everything goes into the record, like file. But for non-tax revenues, they might find more, like, they can play with it. They can either change or reduce the fine, or they can even waive the fine at all. But I'm not sure, to what extent that can be applied in Alabama or the United States, because, we have a much more mature legal and judicial system. Anything else?
So there's, at least on that top level, so when you did the DID, there nothing remained significant, right? Well, I guess then this might not be a relevant question. But when it showed significant reductions in the tax revenue level, but then it didn't show the corresponding increases that we would predict in the redistribution of those funds. Where do you think where is it going? It's not going into those categories.
That's a good question. So to do that, yeah, that's something we're actually doing right now, but I cannot include it here. So you're really talking about the amount of money, right? But remember, what I present is a share.
Yeah.
So what we find, if there's an increase or decrease in share, it doesn't mean the size of the increase, right? So for example, what we're saying is there might be an increase in the non-tax revenue, but we don't know for sure. So what we need to know is, if what you said is true, like if you release more on the non-tax resources and they want to spend it somewhere else, we have to go back and check the total fiscal revenue of the government actually increased. Anything else?
All right, one last round of applause.